Hello and welcome. This is To Your Point, a brand new show from the Sons of UCF. I'm Jeff Allen, your host and moderator, and this show is a roundtable discussion about UCF sports that will feature three panelists who cover and contribute to various podcast and journalistic endeavors. As we roll out our first question, I will introduce each of our panelists as they come up for their turn here in the quad box. First, I am delighted to welcome Chris Boyle. He covers the UCF beat for the Daytona Beach News Journal. And our first question, Chris, is what has surprised you most about this UCF football season?
About the football season, that it's basically Groundhog's Day. The similarities are really interesting. I mean, they started 3-0 for the second year in a row. They lost the next 5, just like they did last year. And, here we are kind of again talking about the long-term prospects of can UCF contend in this league? Is Gus Malzahn the right guy to lead the program? What's the quarterback situation looking like? I mean, the debate last year was between John Rice Plumlee and Timmy McClain when he played for a little bit there the first few games. This year, it's been kind of a roulette situation week to week. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's been the most surprising part of it. This is supposed to be, and honestly, from a personnel standpoint, I think we can all kind of agree it's a better roster than it was last year. They're better in a lot of key areas. They're the 31st in the country against the run when they were 122nd last year. They've got R.J. Harvey, who's a Doak Walker Award semifinalist. They've got plenty on the defensive side in the front seven from a talent perspective, but they haven't had the production that we all expected. KJ Jefferson was benched after 5 games. The receivers, it took a long time to find a running mate for Kobe Hudson until Jacoby Jones really kind of ran with that role. And, the secondary has kind of been hit and miss at times, and they've really missed B.J. Adams the last 2 weeks, in particular the Arizona State game, going head-to-head with Tyson. So that's the long-winded version of saying that we're kind of in the same spot as a, if you're a UCF fan, you're in the same spot as a program to where you were this time, and you could arguably be more disappointed in that, the fact that they're having again claw and scratch to even get to a bowl game.
All right, next up we have former UCF basketball development coach and frequent contributor to the Sons of UCF, Ben Hazel. Ben, what surprised you the most?
First, thanks for having me, Jeff. I mean, I know you see the hat. Yeah, Sons of UCF, you know what it is.
Yeah, you gotta love the swag.
As far as biggest surprise for me, I want to keep it on the positive side. Dylan Risk. I know you talked about the quarterback carousel that the team's been on this past year, but what he's been able to do coming in as, the new QB1, completing 73% of his passes, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. Like, at least he's finally been able to interject some energy in this team. People underestimate, with the transfer portal being what it is, how deep of a hole you can get in once you start losing, right? To galvanize these guys to want to compete. I think he's been able to do that. And I think that's a piece that, of course, if he stays, they can build on. But I think, there's something to be said with him being a redshirt, being in the program and understanding the system. I mean, we've seen this quarterback thing be an issue for not only just UCF, we see it across the country. So I think that's something that they might want to take into consideration when looking into next year.
All right. And last but not least, we bring in from the Pegasus Podcast, Christian Simmons. What is the big surprise for you in this season?
Yeah, I mean, it feels overly simplistic to say the biggest surprise has been just how bad the team is. So I guess I'll try to be a little more creative than that. But that was a surprise for sure. For me, it has genuinely just, I don't know if we, because we've been in the middle of it this season, have fully processed how insane what we've seen happen at quarterback this year has been when you actually track it from the start of the season, from the preseason to now. I mean, I just imagine if I time traveled back and grabbed late July Christian and said, I've got some news for you. And I'm like, UCF's going to the Big 12 title game? And I'd have to go, no. But they did start 4 different quarterbacks all the way down the roster, starting with KJ Jefferson, who we all had all the hype in the world threw for 8,000 plus yards in the SEC. Wasn't some flash in the pan or some one you're projecting out like John Rice Plumlee. This is a guy who you knew would be good because he'd been good for many years. He gets replaced by E.J. Colson, who then gets replaced because Johnny Richardson fumbled. And then we move on to Jakari Brown, who the Jakari Brown era lasts a couple of games. Then he's replaced by Dylan Risk. And somehow the 4th string quarterback on the roster ends up being the guy. And as Ben was just saying, doing a really good job as the guy. And we're somehow in a world where SEC transfer KJ Jefferson is, I guess, the 4th string quarterback on the roster right now. So I think just all the hypotheticals I went through in my head this offseason of what this year could look like, good and bad, what will happen, what won't happen. I never considered 4 different starting quarterbacks. That was not something on my bingo card. And if it was on your bingo card, I would love to talk with you about lottery numbers, gambling, things of that nature. So just hit me up if you did expect this.
Well, one of the best things about being the host and moderator is I get to gravy train off all the great points you guys make. So I kind of have to echo kind of what Chris said. Second verse, same as the first, right? That's one of the biggest surprises to me is like it's virtually a carbon copy of a year ago. And you would think with Gus making all the changes and, the buck stops here, blah, 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 that something would have been different, but it wasn't. And then I would say part of the other equation is, it just surprised me how bad KJ Jefferson was. I mean, it was bad from the very first game, and they kind of made excuses for him. And the second game was a little bit better, but quality of opponent notwithstanding, it was just really a precursor of what was to come. So I think that was a lot of what surprised me the most was, if he'd have been average, that'd have been one thing, but he was just beyond bad, as frankly as I can say that. All right, let's move on to topic number 2. And it's kind of been alluded to already. So is it time to consider a coaching change for UCF football? Ben, you get the first crack at this one.
I'm probably going to go against the grain with this one, but I'm going to go ahead and say no. The first thing in this new era of college sports is, where does our NIL collective stack up to the conference? That's the number one question that you need to have answered. And if you're in the bottom half, you know that you're dealing with a coach that's dealing with what he would feel like a half deck. Like he's not dealing with a full toolbox to build what he needs to build to be truly competitive. So when you talk about that and then you throw on the $12 million buyout, it just doesn't necessarily seem like the smartest move to get rid of him right now. The luxury with this whole entire market is the transfer portal. So every year feels like a brand new year. I mean, so next year might be the same, but you're going to have a pretty new roster, some new pieces, and Gus has been there before. So he is somebody that knows how to get it done at the highest level. You just need to hope the stars align and that he can kind of get a hold of some things in the recruiting market and get a better result next year.
Christian, you're next.
I don't like going after Ben. It makes me feel so mean, but I have a little bit of a different take on what I'm hoping or believe should happen. And my answer is that, yes, I do think it is time for a coaching change. I think that how that coaching change happens is key here because, to Ben's point, I don't believe that UCF can afford to pay that buyout even if they wanted to. And because I think the things fans need to understand what they say on Twitter, well, why don't they just find the money or why don't boosters pony up, is it's not $12 million. $12 million is to get rid of Gus. Then you need more money to get rid of his assistants. Then you need more money to buy out all the contracts of whatever coaches you want to bring in. I mean, this is like a $20-25 million purchase if you actually want to make a change. But as we've seen now sort of rumbling around on CBS, on 247, on Football Scoop, is talks of, well, what if Gus retires? What if he at 59 decides that this is it? Things aren't going great. He transitioned into the Big 12. It's time for a change. And I can't imagine he would walk away for free. I sure wouldn't if a school owed me money, but maybe they find some number in the middle that's more doable for both sides. And the thing for me that I'm struggling with going forward is Gus pulled out all the stops of we're going to fix this last offseason. He changed both coordinators. They hit the portal hard. He said, I'm changing who's calling plays. I mean, we just did all this. So it's hard to have that offseason we just had and say, well, where's the trust come from where the fan base believes things will be different this time? And there isn't necessarily a shiny recruiting class to lean on like there was last time. This class was borderline top 25. It's fallen into the 60s on 247 now. I mean, this class is not that different on paper from how they were recruiting at the end of the AAC era. So it's just, I'm not seeing the roadmap anymore to a path forward. And that's too bad because I was really excited about what this era could be. But it feels like it's at the point in time where, yeah, UCF can't fire him. I don't think that's even sort of doable. But if you can come to some kind of agreement where he walks away for a reasonable amount, I think it's just kind of time to pull that trigger.
All right, Chris.
Well, I'm glad that they've taken opposite ends of this because I'm going to kind of go down the middle because I can absolutely hear arguments as to why you should and why you shouldn't. I mean, for starters, Christian kind of hit one of the reasons you shouldn't is how much money it's going to cost. Because if you want John Sumrall, who I know has been kind of the most popular candidate, you're going to have to pay him at least middle of the road money in the Big 12, which is somewhere in the $5.5 to $6 million a year range. Tulane is a private institution that does not publish its buyout, so we don't know what that number is. Not to mention that he's in the first year of his contract at Tulane, so you can assume that that number is going to be extremely high to buy it out in year one. So if part of it is, who are you going to replace Gus with? If you have a firm candidate in mind, if it's G.J. Kinney, he was just here on staff a couple of years ago at Texas. He's at Texas State. There's some level of consistency. If it's somebody completely off the board, if it's a Dan Mullen who's out of the game, if it's Scott Frost, who I know there's still factions of fans who want to turn back the clock and relive the glory years and bring Frost back from the Rams assistant coaching staff. If it's, I saw CBS in 24/7, one of the names that listed was John Gruden, which is patently insane. I mean, again, you have to have a firm plan in place and know what you're going to do. I think, you can definitely sell the fan base on why it's time to upgrade from Gus. They're making a lot of the same mistakes. I think is the biggest thing to me. The turnovers, the lack of discipline, the false starts against Arizona State were killer. The special teams has been bad again. The passing game has been, for half the season was non-existent, and we knew it was going to be potentially problematic coming into the year. And I think the biggest part, and Christian kind of hit on this too, is the recruiting. The recruiting has fallen. It's harder to sell the vision on these athletes when the results are not falling behind them. I mean, you're losing guys to Colorado who came into UCF and punched them in the mouth. You're losing guys to Florida State. They lost two twin pass rushers, to argue the worst Florida State team this century. They've lost guys to other kind of middle of the road type programs just because the results are not there right now. I mean, you obviously lost a guy to Ole Miss and Clemson. You can understand those type of situations. Those are always going to tend to happen. But when you factor in the totality of it, the investment, the fact that you're going to basically overhaul the roster and the coaching staff, and not to mention you only have now 2 weeks to do this before the first signing period opens, and then the portal right behind it. So you're going to basically punt on 2025. If there's an understanding, there's a vision that, look, our best path forward is to blow this up entirely and to let this take some time, then you can argue that that's the right move. But if you want to win next year, like I know a lot of fans are hungry to win and think that UCF should be winning every single year, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen when you have that much change from year upon year, with Indiana being an obvious outlier.
Well, you brought up many things that, have been just continual problems and game coaching decisions. You can also throw that in the list too, because there's been there's been a lot of poor mismanagement there, and just total mismanagement of the program. And, it just kind of amazes me that if money wasn't the object, right? Everybody would pull that trigger like right now, wouldn't they not?
If money wasn't the object, you could recruit every 5-star in the country too. I mean, money's a gigantic object. That's a huge obstacle in this whole thing. Yes,
and I also kind of go back to, okay, if it's $20 to $25 million all told, just to remove and rehire, new coaching staff like that. You guys chime in on this one. Do you think, though, the longer we keep Gus, the bigger hole he puts us in, that, it's going to be a longer road to recovery? What do you think about that?
I mean, can I drop another reason for it to be this offseason? Just another food for thought type thing here is, regardless of what you think of what Gus will do going forward, of whether he can right the ship or not, this is a very special offseason in that the House settlement is coming through right now, and all the Power 4 programs are afraid to get rid of their coaches because they are about to have to pay, I think the cap is at $20 million for revenue sharing with athletes next year. And where are the Power 4 openings going to be this year? I mean, Florida's not firing Napier. Aranda's sticking at Baylor. It's UCF's in a unique position just this year that they're not going to be in next year, where if this job does open, it is, and UCF has money because it was some sort of retirement situation and not them paying Gus all that money, they're suddenly the best job out there by a pretty significant margin. And if this doesn't work next year, if Gus comes back and it is a failure again, then you're going to be in a situation where you'll have all the normal openings like you would next year, and you'd also have all the teams that should have fired their coach this year but didn't. It's going to be a super saturated market. There's going to be a lot of big job openings. You won't have the same candidate pool. So I don't know. That makes it more enticing to me as well, as that this is one weird offseason where there just aren't going to be a lot of openings. So if UCF is an opening, they're going to be a very valuable one.
Yeah, for sure.
There's one big domino to fall, and USA Today reported on it last week, and that's USC. If there's now a potential cause effect in place for avoiding the buyout for Lincoln Riley, which is an enormous amount of money. So if that job comes open, obviously that becomes the primo destination, given the amount of resources that school has. But yeah, I think that's another interesting caveat to this. You're seeing a lot of Group of 5 teams having already just made their decision. They're doing it early, and now the number of Power 5 jobs or Power 4 jobs might not be as high with a few that we kind of expected to be open, not likely to come open. And so it does give you sort of that pick of the bunch type of deal. But again, do you have the money to foot that? Is that going to be a realistic option to just go out there and say, just because UCF's the best fit on the market, that they can actually go out and go get the best possible candidate, or are there going to be restrictions and limitations in place to that?
Yeah. Well, let me take the money off the table, since we can do that here. We're not bound to any of those contractual obligations. We brought up some of the potential names being talked about to be the successor. Of course, I saw a 24/7 piece that had to be purely for clicks, because somebody suggested Deion Sanders. Well, if you can't afford to buy out Gus, you can't afford to buy Deion Sanders. So that's totally off the table. But of the names that have been talked about, DJ Kennedy, who's a former assistant coach here, I definitely agree with the John Gruden thing. That's ludicrous. Scott Frost, I'm sorry to say, 2.0s fail almost 100% of the time. But of the names that have been kicked around out there, who would you guys pick if you're all of a sudden the AD at UCF?
I'll go first. I think if money's not an object, I do think John Sumrall has the best resume of all the coaches that are in the Group of 5 level. The fact that he's now won at 2 schools, and his record speaks for itself. I think it's 32-6 as a head coach, somewhere around there. He's won his conference twice at Troy, and now Tulane is in a position to potentially crash the party in winning the American, and maybe having a chance to take that last playoff bid off the table. So I think he would be the most sensible choice, as far the most, the idealistic choice. Most sensible choice is probably Kinney, because at least you can keep some sense of consistency on the staff. He's close with a few of those guys as well, so you're not going to all of a sudden come in and clean house. I think there will be kind of a hybrid of certain assistants that would be let go, and then there would be other guys that Kinney is very familiar with and wants to work with. And I don't think the buyout, I have to check the buyout of this all, but I think he'd probably be one of the more attainable guys considering where he's at.
Ben, you got a guy?
Well, I would go with Summerall, but the thing that I'm kind of confused about is, are we blowing up this whole thing, or are we half-stepping it with Kennedy? Like, that seems like the lesser of two evils type of situation, but doesn't seem like it's purely in the best interest of the program, just because you've already seen some of the things that he was taught to do as a coach, and those results weren't necessarily what we were looking for. Summerall, I think, has been able to do a lot with less, and I think he'll be able to really fit with what UCF has going and kind of how we're going about it, because people don't take into account like the difference in how mid-majors versus the high majors versus the blue bloods, how they go about things is really different. And sometimes that's a culture shock to coaches, right? Like, oh my God, you don't have an assistant bringing me coffee every 5 minutes, stuff like that. Like it throws them for a loop sometimes. So Summerall seems like a really good fit.
Christian?
Yeah, I'm going to really mix it up here and also say John Sumrall. It's tough. I wish I had a different name for you. And I do think that all the points Chris brought up about the money it would cost, that may prohibit this from happening. But if it's an option, the thing about Gus, and this was something I kind of glossed over when he was hired because I was very excited about that hire and I was in the mood to gloss over anything that might be negative, is his entire, really outside of one season, his entire head coaching career before coming to UCF, he had always been one of the top dogs in the entire country. There weren't a lot of programs that had more money, more resources, more clout, more power than the program he was running. And that is not UCF's reality. And I think there's something really attractive about a guy like Summerall, who's now gone to 2 different places that do not have a long history of winning, that do not have more resources than all the teams they play and all the teams in the country, and has won there. And I think that we're kind of seeing a course correction in some ways in college football hiring over the last few years, where you're starting to see guys rise up and perform really well, like Indiana, for example, of guys who just know how to win at different places and know how to outperform their resources. And I think that if you're UCF and we talk about the constraints that exist, we talk about, how NIL is an issue for them and how they don't have the money of even some of the other teams in their conference. They're not even getting a full share from the Big 12 yet. I think the idea of bringing in a guy who's shown he can win when he is not at the top of the pack or at the top of his conference and resources, that's intriguing. That's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, our crack research staff has informed us that Kenny's buyout is $3 million for those who were interested. And, and it's also kind of an interesting thing in how times have changed as UCF has grown. Remember, it's UCF getting poached for coaches. Now we're looking probably to do the same thing in reverse. So that's probably at least a good sign of.
But if you pick a good one in this Big 12, we're looking at. Just look at what's happening in the playoff bracket. The Big 12 might get one team. They might get 0. There's a genuine path to where they could get 0 teams in the playoff bracket. The SEC and the Big 10 are going to be still the leagues where the biggest amount of coaching interest is going to be in the long run. But yeah, it has kind of reversed a little bit.
Yeah, at least that's a good sign anyway. All right, let's move on to our next topic. So after 18 months, how would you evaluate UCF athletics as a whole in the transition to the Big 12? Christian, you're up first this time.
The football team isn't going to the playoffs, so it's been a failure. They never should have left the AAC. What are we even doing here? It's tough for fans, I think, to look at the whole picture, because I think when you say transition to the Big 12, I think a lot of people are just going to focus right on football, right? And I want to clarify, I believe it's time for a coaching change. It hasn't been a disaster. The football team is not in shambles. They're not winning any games. They went to a bowl last year. They have a small but decent chance at going to a bowl again this year if they can win these next 2. The football team hasn't been a total mess. And outside of football, things have gone well. Men's basketball is the biggest deal it's been in years on UCF's campus. It's like just them having that debut season they did and getting some of those big wins has just totally changed the culture around that program. I just love, even for a game that wasn't a particularly big one, like last night, you still see this packed student section, palm fronds. It's just joining the Big 12 elevated the basketball program so immediately, and not just on the court, but just from a fan base perspective and their interest. And we've seen that in other sports. We've seen baseball really take off. Women's basketball is off to a strong start this year. And not everything's been perfect. The volleyball team is doing its thing, and women's soccer has had some struggles, but on the whole, this wasn't a situation where UCF athletics got to the Big 12 and it was like, oh, they're not ready, they can't compete. A lot of sports have had quick success, and it's cool because success was always great in the AAC, and I don't want to discount those years. I'm not one of those guys who's like, oh, that was G5, whatever. But that success that they have had so far has come on a bigger stage with bigger programs and bigger fan bases, and it's had a bigger spotlight and more attention, and kind of feels like UCF's a little more around their peers now. I think UCF fans have a lot more in common with Texas Tech fans and Kansas State fans than they ever did with, Tulane fans or Temple fans. So it's felt kind of like UCF's home. And no, everything hasn't been perfect, but they're moving in the right direction. Some programs are having success, and I think they're in a good spot.
All right, Chris.
I'm going to harp on money again. You see down here at the bottom where it says UCF does not receive a full share of TV revenue until 2025. That's going to be a big deal. It's going to be a big deal and allow them to do more things on campus from an infrastructure standpoint of being able to potentially make coaching changes, be able to bring in a higher level of talent across the board. That will matter in the long run. As far as the on-field stuff, I think overall it's been a fairly decent transition. The fact that they made the tournament in baseball last year as kind of an out of nowhere team with a new coach and with a new roster. Basketball is off to a 4-0 start, beat a nationally ranked opponent in the first game of the season, gets another great crack at a top 25 team on Friday. And yeah, we talked about I mentioned the food chain element of football where the SEC and the Big 10 are the top dogs. Big 12 is a top dog in basketball. This is a league that the best players in the country want to be a part of and it's opening new doors in the South region for UCF to recruit into, to be able to sign a player of Mustafa Cham's ability and his pedigree is a huge deal. To be in on the top schools list for 2 top 10 national players for 2025 is a big deal. And the opportunity to potentially make the tournament, despite not having to essentially run a perfect gauntlet through conference play, is a big deal. They could realistically finish a couple games under 500 in Big 12 play and still have a chance to make the NCAA tournament. It's a huge momentum shift and a huge changeover for the basketball program. So I think overall it's been positive. No one's really going to jump full all the way in until football starts winning significantly, though. That'd be my one caveat.
All right, Ben, what's your take?
Everything's going according to plan, right? Like if I'm a AD and I'm looking at our transition, of course, we've had some bumps in the road, which we probably hit on the head ad nauseum, especially for the football team. But when you talk about that revenue share going up in 2025, you talk about the exposure. That's the number one thing that you want, right? Like you wanted that exposure. I've seen us on ESPN more than I ever had. So, the horns down, beating number 1 Texas. We were on PTI. Like the level of exposure that we're getting is something that will continue to pay dividends. Fans are starting to talk about us, about the nights that they can't remember when they came to the away game at UCF. Recruits are noticing the impact that you can have when you have a successful team in Orlando, just because you don't have the same competition when you talk about a professional team or just other universities in the area. So there's a lot to offer. We're continuing to grow. It's something to be happy about. Of course, we're not winning enough in the right places. Basketball's doing well. I think the hot start is gotten a lot of momentum amongst the fan base, but still a long way to go. But we're right on track for what I would have expected if I'm an AD making this transition.
What I like to evaluate it, based on the branding, because we kind of have touched on that. When you look at, when UCF and BYU had a series several years ago, we're probably relegated to a Thursday night time slot on ESPN or ESPN2, right? Now we're getting Saturday afternoon time slots on Fox and things like that. So I do like that aspect of it. It shows that growth. We're bringing marquee names in as our opponents, especially, we talk about the Big 12 being the top carrot in college basketball. It just, when I look at our schedule, my heart just kind of beats, and because I love college basketball, and just to see that this is the kind of caliber that we're going to see night in and night out is fabulous. And
yeah, they had 9 games in the start before the schedule got released against preseason, like in the coaches poll that we use, preseason top 25 teams, 9 games on the schedule right out of the gate. And that doesn't even include the teams that might pop up on it later. Wisconsin wasn't ranked, and all of a sudden they're 25th in the country on one poll, 19th in the AP poll, and all of a sudden that becomes a potentially quad 1 huge deal game. And who knows, Pittsburgh right behind it, they're receiving votes right now too.
Yeah. So yeah, that speaks to it very, very well. So yeah, I would just say, the overall athletics part of it, anybody that thought we were just going to come in and dominate in each and every sport, that's fool's gold. But if we're middle of the pack, here in year 2, I think that's good. We're not just absolutely terrible in Big 12 across the board in sports, things like that. I would say the disappointing part to me, I thought volleyball was well equipped to go into the Big 12 and be competitive out of the gate, and that hasn't really panned out as much. But those are just going to be growing pains that we're just going to have to learn to live with for probably another 2 or 3 years as it goes. But then again, we keep coming back to money. So the revenue share is going to be great. And I think that's going to be just fabulous end result and all that. So seeing the Big 12 logo, when we saw this spring up last year, it's like, man, this is real. Now we're feeling big time. And that is definitely of interest to me. So we've been talking a little bit about basketball. So let's transition into the hot start of UCF men's hoops, 4-0. Can this team compete in the Big 12 and earn an NCAA tournament berth? Chris?
Like I said, I think there's enough opportunities to where if they just can survive and withstand over the course of the second half of the year, they're going to give themselves plenty of opportunities to earn an at-large. I still think, to me, I still think it might be just a step too far this year. I think it'll help when we get to see what they look like with a full unit, when Mikey Williams and what Jalen Sellers are back, to kind of get an idea of what those guys' roles are going to be. They've played a lot of close games already this season. They've played 4 games, and every one of them's been kind of a single possession game at some point late in the second half. The 3-point shooting's been inconsistent. The defense has been good at times, but I think can certainly be better, and I'm sure they're going to be tightening that up and focusing on that, knowing Johnny Dawkins and his personality. The one thing that has stood out to me, though, is, and Johnny mentioned it last night against Tennessee Tech, they've been good late in games. They've been really good at closing games out, making the right play, finding a way in those last 4 to 5 minutes in games of being the better team on the floor. That translates, and I think that will certainly help them as the year goes on, and maybe being able to get a couple of key wins at home, maybe 1 or 2 on the road. The path is certainly there, and they'll only be able to make it easier on themselves if they keep this momentum going in the non-conference. But yeah, I think it's just a little bit optimistic at the moment because of how deep and how good the league is. But I do think it's absolutely a possibility.
All right. And of course, as a man who's had involvement with UCF basketball, Ben, I'm definitely interested in your perspective on this.
So we could definitely compete. We've already shown that, right? Like, even the games that we lost last year, they were by single digits. That's just how this conference is laid out, right? Like, every game, everybody's bringing their best, and the games are going to be tight. The number one thing that I look at that gives me kind of some encouragement really is the matchups, right? So with us being senior led at the guard spot, that's where we're really deep, especially when you include a Jalen. I'm not necessarily throwing Mikey in that mix just yet because I haven't seen him play at this level. But we do know Jalen with his leadership. That's why we have been able to close out games. Darius, Jordan Ivy Curry, even Keyshawn Hall. We haven't been really fazed by pressure. Guys have really handled it, made good shots, made good plays. They play really well together. Where we're going to need to see growth to make the NCAA tournament is going to be in our forward position, Mustafa being the main one. The thing that makes me happy about that is that he has the motor to be one of the better centers in this conference. The issue is he can't put on 30 pounds in 2 days. So what we're going to need from him is just to be able to find ways to be effective defensively, of course, blocking shots and changing shots, but being able to help the guards and stop not letting the ball go in so easily, playing the position game, being able to execute scout, because bigs tend to be very one-sided, like they really are good finishing over the right or the left, and he'll figure out the best way to implement that stuff so he can be effective without fouling. Because if him and Benny can continue to grow, I do think we will have a great shot, at competing to get in the tournament.
All right, Christian, your thought.
Yeah, I'm just gonna warn you guys in advance. I'm getting way too excited about this basketball season, and my head's probably not in a realistic or healthy place about what they can do. But it's hard to not be excited about 4-0, particularly just because this is a program, especially under Dawkins, that I think that, it's not a secret that the fans haven't always been fair about what the expectations were for this program and what they could achieve. And to see them off to such a hot start with so many players who are playing so well. And I think there's a football juxtaposition here that's interesting to me, in that we talk about how, football doesn't have the money of a lot of the other teams in the Big 12. Sure, that's true. That's accurate. We've talked about it a ton here, but they still got a lot of resources from the school. They got money from boosters to go get guys they wanted out of the portal, bring in KJ. And it's always felt like basketball just never really got its fair share of resources. And for that to be the program that is having such immediate success in the Big 12 is just, it's exciting and it's rewarding. And part of the reason I'm feeling confident is not just because I like where the team's at, but it's because of the really tough schedule. It's because of the fact that the Big 12 is a very, very tough, very respected conference. And I don't think they need to go out there and win it, or maybe even, as Chris pointed out, have an over 500 record in it to make the tournament. And what's exciting about playing at this level is once they get into conference play, I mean, you've got 3 Big 12 teams are in the top 10 of the AP poll right now. 6 are in the top 25. 11 of the 16 are at least receiving votes. It's like once you get into conference play, virtually every game you're going to play is a potential resume game. And yeah, you're not going to win all of them. You might not win most of them, but every time you go out there, you have the chance to earn a statement win that's going to help you get there. And I do think this is a situation where their record might not be crazy. I don't think, I know John Rothstein has mentioned them a couple times as a Big 12 sleeper. I don't think I'm there, but I do think this is a schedule and a team where they can make noise and they can get some big wins. And I think it might be enough to get them back to the tournament for the first time since 2019, which I think we're all very eager to see and very excited about.
One thing real quick, and Ben kind of touched on this, is that end of game lineup where they don't have Cham on the floor. They are a very small team. Benny Williams, really the biggest guy out there at 6'9", 6'8" maybe. So that rebounding really came into play against Texas A&M in that last 10 seconds. They had 3 shots. They had 3 cracks to tie the game. Were able to just gobble up offensive rebounds. I think that's going to be another kind of thing as the end of the year comes around to find a crunch time lineup that can match up, and whether they embrace small ball and can do so against teams, but there are going to be some teams that have some big guys there to where they're going to need, whether it's Cham or even Yotzius at the end of the year to play some minutes and to provide some size.
But that's why I was even thinking, that's why the matchups matter, right? So who's real big that's going to pound it inside? Okay, Hunter Dickinson comes to your head. But Baylor, they just got Norchad Omier. He's undersized, really effective, really good. But I like that matchup for Mustafa, especially if he continues to go on. BYU doesn't scare me in the post. Arizona, they got some athletes, but they're not big bruisers down there. I mean, college basketball, you're very hard pressed to find any team's best player to be in the tank. So that's the one luxury that we do have. We just need them to stay out of foul trouble. At least we're not in that space where it's I need you to stay out of foul trouble. I need you to score. I need you to pick and pop, set guys up. We really just need you to run the floor, screen and roll, block shots, stay out of foul trouble, and help on that glass.
Ben, do we really want Mustafa shooting threes and making them like he did the other night? Because I don't want him to get trigger happy out there.
No, we do not, but it is good to know that he can make it. It's something that, down the stretch, you guys watched enough college basketball where you're watching the tournament and you're like, there's no way that goes in, and then it does and your team wins, or vice versa. But I think that is something in the back of the head that, if he does make a shot down the stretch, we can all say we weren't surprised.
It's like, oh no, good shot. Yeah, there you go. Well, with this question, if it was a buy or sell question, I would say I would like to lease with an option to buy, because we've seen hot starts from the team, and then conference play comes and things don't go as planned. And that was, a lot of the cases even in the AAC, and obviously the Big 12 is a much bigger bridge in that regard. But what I'm really encouraged about is I love the fact, we probably have as many, if not more, scoring options for the first time since the tournament team. And we don't even have Sellers and Williams, so we get those guys back and contributing. This team could give me the FAU vibes from a couple of years ago. That team went 10 deep, and they just kept coming at you in waves and waves. So I like the fact that we have those scoring options. We've got some guys that can hit from the mid range, because that's one of the biggest things that lacks in basketball is mid range game, and I think that's a big factor in becoming a successful team. And then I think the growth of DJ. Darius Johnson, he looks much more calm. He doesn't look like he's forcing things. He's taking the 3 ball at the right opportune times and making big shots. So I think with all the additional firepower that we have, I'm optimistic that this team could somehow scratch out. They might be a last 4 in, but I think they're definitely encouraging signs as far as that goes.
The Sons of UCF is brought to you by Alumni Hall. Look, being a supporter of your university is more than a diploma on the wall. It means cheering them to victory and singing the fight song. It's a part of who you are. And Alumni Hall understands the need to showcase that school spirit and pride in every day of your life. That's why they're proud to have their new shop located at 4100 North Alafaya Trail, dedicated specifically to UCF merchandise. If it's UCF gear you want, from a unique selection of clothing for the entire family, Alumni Hall has you covered. They are now the hometown college store for our great fan base here at UCF. Again, check them out, 4100 North Alafaya Trail, or go to alumnihall.com, search UCF, to make sure you are a part of the action.
All right, now time to close out the show, and we're going to do a little thing we call nightcaps. This is where each of our panelists gets a chance to take a couple of minutes to rant or whatever they want on any topic, anything, anyhow. And so let's get underway with that. Christian, you're first.
We've talked about a lot of things that aren't important tonight, like the football team or their success or really any of the athletics programs. I want to talk about something that's way more important than any of that, and that is the uniforms that the football team has actually worn on the field this season, because I've had a little bit of an issue with how this has played out. So let's just rewind back into how the season has gone. You may remember a full month-long stretch on Twitter where the entire UCF fan base lost their minds in ways that I can't even fathom because UCF wasn't wearing gold enough. And I got to say, I agree with them on one. UCF against Colorado wore black helmets with black jerseys and white pants with the white stack UCF decal. Wrong decision. Did not like that for that game. Don't seed gold. That was bad. Every other combo this year has come together to make this one of the strongest uniform years in UCF history. And I am sick and tired of this fan base equating how well the team is doing on the field with whether or not they like the uniforms. This has been a great year. You started the year with what is absolutely the best blackout in the history of the program. You put the white face mask on the black helmets for the first time ever with the white script knights, that beautiful logo, which has even made its way onto the basketball uniforms now. That uniform was so good. You had On3 just tweeting about UCF's uniforms, going, whoa, hey guys, like, yeah, they might be playing New Hampshire, but they look that good. That's how good that combo was. You had the Fight Cancer decals designed by pediatric patients, which was just amazing and such a cool thing to see. You had the Lance logo back for the first time since I was like 9, and we got to see it with the gold numbers on the night mode jerseys. We got an amazing space jersey with a moon dust gradient up the sides. We've seen tons of gold since everyone got mad. I mean, this is really just, we are living in such a good uniform timeline. They have the best gold helmet they've ever had. They switched to a new darker black helmet a couple years ago. And I just hope that everyone can understand that while the team may not be good on the field, and I'm sad about that too, let's leave the uniforms out of it because these uniforms are just excellent. And we are so, so blessed to have them.
Christian, I didn't see you going there at all. Not at all. Although I will say with the Lance logo, I kind of wish they would have gone with the old school Dante jerseys. That would have been primo, in my opinion. Yeah. All right. Okay, nightcap number 2. Ben, take it away.
So, as a DC native, I grew up in the DC area. I am an adopted child of the Orlando area and of the Knight family, but I want to have a heart-to-heart conversation with the Knight faithful and really just say, now is the time to be patient. Let's understand how far we have come and how far we have left to go. When we talk about the money, we talked about how we're going to increase in 2025 when we talk about our revenue share, but I don't think people truly understand what that number is. We went from 8 million in the American Conference. We went to 18 million over these next 2 years, and then we're pretty much close to doubling that number starting in 2025. So we're talking about significant jumps, but the number one thing that every single away fan base says when they leave this place is that they love it. Okay, they have the time of their life. They bring their family, their friends, their cousins, they bring everybody, and they have a great time. And that's because of the Knight faithful. So people are on notice and people are noticing what we have to offer. We're just in the really early stages. We will begin to see the fruits of that labor. So as we look at coaching changes and all of the things and the challenges that we will face, we are following a great plan to see something good at the end of that tunnel.
All right, Ben, appreciate you being the voice of reason. You might have got a few people off the ledge with that speech. So
I'm always here to help, man. I try to keep everybody uplifted because, I've noticed the Knight faithful are really up and down.
I'm just waiting for him to bust out the acoustic guitar and start playing Third Eye Blind.
Whatever it takes.
All right, good job there. All right, nightcap number 3, Chris, take it away.
It's funny because I didn't know if I was going to be the only one to try to keep things into perspective here, but it kind of feels like everybody has in their own unique ways. Christian, our media panel fashionista, in his own particular way, and then Ben exercising patience, which is a great message to deliver across all walks of life, in addition to college athletics. But I think for me, appreciate greatness when it comes to the last couple games of RJ Harvey's career here at UCF. I think that's a big thing. Yes, the football season's not gone how the team anticipated, how the fan base is expected, and honestly, how most of us in the media expected. We thought it would be better. But that said, RJ Harvey has been exactly what you would hope for an Orlando area native to produce at this university. He's been an exemplary person to deal with in the media. He's well respected. He's a team captain. He's now second all time in yards and touchdowns, which is a record he very well may have by the end of the season. There's not, I think, was it 4 to tie and 5 to take the lead, something around there. The guy gives everything he's got to this every single week when every team in the country is scheming against him to try to take him out of the football game. And yet every week he finds ways to impact games, whether that's as a receiver on wheel routes, whether that's in pass protection, whether that's in just, taking 20 carries and doing whatever he can with them in the backfield. And as soon as he gets a crease, to find a hole and to do what he's able to do has been very impressive. Because I remember when I was a student, I did attend UCF from 2007 to 11. I remember watching Kevin Smith and thinking there's probably nobody that we're ever going to see in that stratosphere as a running back at this university, considering how the rosters change year upon year and, really semester on semester now. So to see a guy come in from the portal, change positions, stay with the new coaching staff, undergo an ACL tear in 2021 when he was competing for the starting job, and to go from kind of a secondary player to really becoming the focal point of the offense has been very impressive. I think in addition to RJ, BJ Adams, who's also going to the Senior Bowl with RJ, is worth a mention too, to stay for 4 years, to play over 40 games for UCF, to come up with his first 2 interceptions this year, to take leaps and bounds as far as, as a true number 1 cover corner. I think he's a player that's going to have a really good chance to get drafted too. I remember asking him, with the amount of change, why wasn't the portal something that he was in mind? He said he doesn't like to move. And you know what? He's going to have to get used to that, unfortunately, when he gets to the NFL. But he's done an exemplary job as well with this program. So if nothing else, even if they lose the last 2 games and you're demanding Gus's retirement, resignation, or outright firing, I appreciate that you do have a few guys that have stuck through this thing and become, professional level players on this squad.
Yeah, RJ. There's one word I like to use when a guy is at RJ's level. He's a dude. I mean, just yep. Flat out. And it has often amazed me sometimes how often we've gotten away from him during the course of the season when he does carry the team on his back. That's for sure. And at least now with risk, we have a balanced offense. So at least that's something there. All right. So nightcap number 4 belongs to yours truly. And of course, the last game that UCF played at Arizona State, if you tuned into that broadcast, the crew of Brian Custer and Rod Gilmore made it abundantly clear that ASU star running back Cam Scadaboo was out for the game. They must have said it 200 times. If it was a drinking game, you would not have made it out of the first quarter. And maybe they just liked saying Cam Scadaboo because it is a pretty cool name. However, it's just another case of a broadcast and production team not putting in enough prep for the game. So they just continue beating what they think is the key storyline of the game over and over and over again. In fact, they did it so much, it overshadowed another epic performance by one RJ Harvey. Scadaboo was on camera more than RJ, who was actually playing in the game. So another lazy effort for a broadcast involving UCF football. Rod Gilmore, most notable for being on the wrong end of the legendary Cal Stanford multilateral kick return play as the band was taking the field back in 1982, comes off like a guy who still holds a grudge against UCF for the day the Knights boat raced them a few years ago at the Bounce House, and very reluctant to give proper credit to the Knights during the game. Thank you very much, ESPN. All right, that wraps up our very first episode of To Your Point. For Christian, Ben, and Chris, I'm Jeff Allen. Thanks for joining us.